whether it was Russian aggression, Chinese aggression, Taiwan, Ukraine, again, COVID, the Iranian nuclear situation, we knew that this administration was going to be a disaster. Okay, they have proven that to be the case. Now, they've been pretty ineffective. But at the ACLJ, we took direct action by beefing up our team at the highest level. So we brought on former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We brought on Rick Riddell, former Acting Director of National Intelligence and Ambassador to Germany. We were able to bring both of them on because we were in a financial position to do so. So when they are part of our team, they are not just guests on our radio broadcast. And I always want to encourage people to think past just the hour they see us a day on air or watch us or listen to us. They're not just coming on like guests of the broadcast. We are working with them behind the scenes. We're utilizing their expertise, their context, their knowledge in filings, in FOIA filings, for instance. We'll have them review to make sure we're not using words that would using the right language, taking it to the next level, if you will, at the ACLJ. So this broadcast today, we're going to dive into all the foreign policy work that the ACLJ and our international affiliates is directly engaged in and how we've taken it to a next level.
Mike, one of the things that I am increasingly concerned about, and I think the country's increasingly concerned about, and that is the situation as it relates to China in a couple of different avenues. One is, it seems like the Chinese Communist Party has been emboldened since Joe Biden's been president. They have consistently rebuffed efforts on the COVID-19 investigation. And it seems like the policies that you had in place as Secretary of State have pretty much been, I wouldn't say nullified, they're just not following up on it. What makes no sense to me is that we had, as I say you, but we as a country had such great success. What? Is it just anything that's the previous administration they don't want to touch?
So it may be that. I've certainly seen that in other places as well. But with respect to the Chinese Communist Party in particular, I think they just view it differently than we did. They view it the same way that the foreign policy establishment had viewed it for 40 years before the Trump administration as well, right? It is, if we just sell them some more trinkets, we've got to figure out how to get along. They're a big country. We can't upset the Chinese Communist Party. Our view was they have destroyed millions of jobs in the United States of America. They've stolen billions of dollars in wealth. They've now foisted this virus that killed hundreds of thousands of Americans upon us and covered it up. They're committing genocide in the western part of China. They want to take over an independent nation of Taiwan. They destroyed freedom in Hong Kong. This collective set of activities makes the Chinese Communist Party, if you add it to their military capability, the singular greatest threat to our freedom here at home. We were serious about responding to that. And while they've said a few things that are good in the Biden administration, there is no evidence they're prepared to exexecute on those things.
One of the things that I found fascinating on the Hong Kong situation was Hong Kong, which was a beacon of freedom, basically, in the metric of dealing with China. Because of the way the legalities were set up, where China was able to reassert control, was there anything that could have been done, do you think, to make that transition where it would not have foisted, basically, the Communist Party's control directly on Hong Kong like it has?
So it's a very difficult proposition, different than Taiwan. There are many more tools available for Taiwan. This was an internal negotiated agreement that had been made. And the Chinese clearly walked away from their part of the agreement with the United Kingdom and, frankly, with the world. So it was a difficult problem. We tried to support the freedom-loving people there. We tried to support Jimmy Lai. You all did good work on religious freedom there. Here at the ACLJ, that was an important part of what you were doing. So we tried to provide the underpinnings, but in the end, when Xi made the decision that he was going to use force and political power to overtake that and make it, frankly, Hong Kong now just another Chinese communist city, the tools that we had in our arsenal were pretty limited.
We are in a matching challenge here at the American Center for Law and Justice, and that means any amount you donate to the ACLJ, we have someone that's going to match that. So if you make a $20 gift, someone's going to give another $20, makes it $40. We encourage you to participate. Matching challenges are very important for our ongoing work here at the ACLJ. Simply go to aclj.org. That's aclj.org and become part of the Matching Challenge campaign.
We know now, both administrations agreed that the Chinese are committing genocide. There's no mistake about that. That's one agreement between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. But the question, I think, for a lot of people is, have we gotten to the point of no return when it comes to holding the Chinese Communist Party and their leaders actually accountable for these actions? Can we do that? Is it possible to turn back this clock, if you will, with a new set of political leaders and a new set of policies?
You know, Jordan, it's a really important question. Everyone who's watching this today needs to understand that the magnitude of what is happening there rivals what happened in Europe in the 1930s. This is a problem of epic scale and a set of human rights violations that is, well, it's hard to even talk about, right? Forced sterilizations, women being forced to have abortions, internment, taking families apart on a scale of millions. So that requires a global response, certainly an American-led global response. There are things we can do. We can sanction leaders. We can convince them that commerce coming from that part of Western China is not going to flow not only to the United States, but to any place in the West. So impose a real economic cost on the Chinese leadership. There are a series of tools we could take, none of which require new laws. I think there'd be bipartisan support on Capitol Hill for this. But in the end, President Biden's got to make a decision. Does he want to just accept genocide as the standard practice for the Chinese Communist Party? Or is he going to take real actions that can convince them that they can't continue to do this?
You know, I want to switch our focus a little bit to the Middle East, because it's interesting that we're dealing with China in significant ways and have been. And then we have the situation with Iran and then the greater Middle East issue. I have said that Iran is the greatest exporter of terrorism in the world, because they will support Hezbollah and they will support Hamas. When we look at Iran, we had this horrific Joint Comprehensive Plan, JCPOA, that was not even an agreement to supposedly slow down Iran's nuclear ambition. At the same time, I will never forget this, we had a pastor that was in jail. His name was Saeed Abedini. They finally got released. The first thing he told me when he got released, when he came to the United States, was, why in the world did the United States pay $1.8 billion to the Iranians? This literally, I'm on a conference call, you know, to this regime. Because, of course, he's looking at it as just, this is more money for terrorism, more money for repression of freedom. So you look at the nuclear deal that the Biden administration seems to be bent on getting back into. Then there's these reports that the nuclear activities have been increasing, and on top of that, while the United States withdrew from the agreement, the rest of the European Union stayed in it. And the Iranians acknowledged they have not been following it. So why is this deal so important to this administration when we know the end result of it's going to be not followed? Is this an Obama legacy issue for them?
Yes, 100%. This has become an article of faith for the left inside the foreign policy establishment. This was the greatest achievement of President Obama's second term. That's their term, not mine. So when we walked away from this was heretical. Getting back in it is absurd. I chuckle when you talked about Pastor Abedini. It's not funny. I chuckle because it is so absurd to think that we're going to buy our way out of the problem set with these mullahs in Iran. Just look at the binary change in Iranian behavior. We withdrew from the JCPOA and began to take down the capacity of the regime to conduct terror around the world and build their nuclear program. We had them to their last $4 billion of foreign exchange reserves. The new administration comes in and makes clear we're going to pay any price, bear any cost to get back into this deal. And the Iranians reject them. They continue to extract. So they've now received permission to receive some $7 billion from the frozen assets from Asia. They have conducted missile launches from Gaza Strip through their proxy terrorist Hamas into Israel. Right. They're now hijacking ships off Fujairah in the open waters in the international water space. The Iranian regime knows that they have a free hand, and the Americans are sitting at the table begging them to come back into this poorly constructed deal. It's an article of faith. There is no logic to it unless you believe the core proposition that Iran as a balancing actor, and I've heard some Democrats say this, we need Iran to be more powerful so they'll balance out the bad actors in Saudi Arabia and in the Emirates and in Israel. I think this is crazy. It's not in America's best interest, and yet I think there are some on the left who hold this view. It's by the way, last thing to say, it borders on anti-Semitic.
No, I think it does.
Because of the support for the most anti-Semitic regime in the Middle East, the Iranian regime, endangers Israel, makes it more likely that they have to actually attack the Iranian nuclear program. and puts at risk the Jewish homeland.
You know, it was interesting, as we were isolating Iran when you were Secretary of State, and we saw the benefits of that. And at the same time, we saw the Abraham Accords. So you had this significant development of Middle East, the progression of Middle East peace, with the Palestinian issue not resolved, because the Palestinians' leadership has to want to resolve it. And as we've seen in Oslo, as we've seen in the Camp David Accords, in the Y Agreement, in all of these, at the end of the day, when the Palestinian Authority is offered everything they've asked for, they still turn it down, because they want, this is a business enterprise for them. But we saw the success of the Abraham Accords. How significant do you think that is?
Very significant. I don't think it will unravel, because I think the people in Bahrain and the Emirates and in the other countries too, Jordan, Egypt, the places that have recognized Israel, Morocco, Sudan, I think they're all going to conclude this is in their best interest. But I will say this, the policies that are being put in place are back to the same Obama policies that threaten the Jewish right to their own space. The Abraham Accords and our Iran policy were deeply linked. We'd love to resolve the Palestinian issue, but in the end, the Palestinian leadership has to make the case to their own people. This is where, too, the ACLJ has been very important. Remember, Israel is the one nation where Christians, Jews, Muslims can all worship. The Israelis' right to these lands is pretty clear. They are not an occupying nation. This BDS movement, stuff that the ACLJ has been working on for an awfully long time. We have to stay after this. This administration will not defend these issues and not protect America and Israel. I'm so glad that you all are engaged on these issues.
I mean, we're dealing with one right now. I mean, and this is, I mean, you would think, how could this be an issue with Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company? Okay, so the Ben & Jerry's cancels, basically says if you're going to sell in the settlements, by the way, these settlements have 60, 70,000 people in them. These are not like tents pitched. I mean, these are villages and towns and cities.
These are cities.
We represent Gush Etzion Foundation. I mean, and it's got a storied history. But it's amazing to me that they, you know, so we've got, I call it the ice cream diplomacy going on in the in Israel right now. But Jordan, go ahead.
It's interesting, Secretary Pompeo. You recently said if America is not strong, the world will be at the mercy of tyrants and enter an era we dare not imagine.
Look, that statement was both historical and predictive. Historical, that we know when America is weak, what happens. We know that we watch the Anschluss, we watch Sudetenland, right? We know what happens when we allow tyrants to roam free. And so if America is not leading, that in fact they'll have a lot of room to take away freedom here at home in the United States.
We are in a matching challenge here at the American Center for Law and Justice, and that means any amount you donate to the ACLJ, we have someone that's going to match that. So if you make a $20 gift, someone's going to give another $20, makes it $40. We encourage you to participate. Matching challenges are very important for our ongoing work here at the ACLJ. Simply go to aclj.org. That's aclj.org and become part of the Matching Challenge campaign.
Let's move to a discussion on religious liberty, because obviously that's one of the core reasons the ACLJ came into existence was the fight for religious liberty. It's now expanded globally. We talked before about, you know, Israel's the only real democracy in the Middle East that allows the free exercise of religion for all faiths. It was interesting. The UN, they do these inspections and they call them reports. They're really like investigations on religious liberty. So we were asked, because our European Center for Law and Justice is a NGO with the UN, so we have status. So they asked us to help put together the Israel dossier, basically the report. But it was being done by their people, and they wanted to meet and have us help set up meetings. They had other groups do it too, but we played a large role. Interestingly, they wanted to meet with Christians in the West Bank or Gaza. This is part of what they wanted to do. So they said that we just want to go there and interview them. I said, wait a minute, you don't just go there and interview them. They're not openly practicing their religion in the West Bank and Gaza, especially in Gaza, but West Bank too, because Hamas has pretty much taken over the West Bank, as you know. So we had them meet with pastors on an olive grove outside of Bethlehem. So when we look at the issue of religious freedom and religious persecution, which we've handled globally, I want to start again with China. You said it, we've said it, we continue to say it. They are practicing religious persecution at a level that we cannot imagine. I went to We've been to China. I spoke at a conference supported by the Chinese government and the Peking University, Chinese government, basically. And it was on religious liberty, First Amendment. They had judges come in, U.S. judges come in, Court of Appeals judges. It was a very, well-done event. The Attorney General and his staff, there was probably 1,500 people in attendance. But what was interesting was I met with some of the leaders of the house churches, which people don't have an understanding what those house churches. It's not 10 people in a room underneath. I mean, it may be 2 floors of an office building. But they're not openly do it. They do have the Three Self-Patriotic Christian Church, which is the official Christian church, the government church. What was so incredible to me was, they said, well, where do you want to worship that Sunday? And I said, let's go to the I want to see what it's like at the Three Self-Patriotic Church. So we go there, and the pastors, songs you'd recognize being sung, obviously in Chinese, but you know the hymns, and pastor starts a sermon, and it seems like a pretty regular sermon. I mean, it was a decent sermon that stops in the middle of it. And says, of course, none of this would exist. He's talking about salvation. He's talking about faith. None of this would exist without, then it goes into the whole Chinese Communist Party discussion. So when you look at, you said oppression, persecution, genocide, the religious persecution in China is real.
It's real and growing.
Yes.
I know many folks who have gone to China over the last 30 years as missionaries, as pastors, to try and build up faith communities, to take Bibles. They will all tell you that today is worse than it was 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. The room for freedom to practice faith is now grossly limited and dangerous. We've seen this happen to young people who come to the United States and who just want to go back there and preach the Lord. Or we've had folks who want to go over there and talk about Islam inside the country. No opportunity to do so. It is as repressive a regime when it comes to religious freedom as any place in the world. And I'd add one thing. We need every person of faith working on this set of issues. The ACLJ has an important role there, but the churches themselves, including the Catholic Church, needs to bear witness to this horror.
One last thing on that. We've got a case right now involving a Chinese Pastor John Saul. Mm-hmm. He has American green card. He was living in the United States, going back to China, doing basically mission work. Gets picked up, charged, put in prison. I think it's going on year 4 now. We've taken it to the UN's arbitrary detention panel. They said he's being detained unlawfully. Of course, China doesn't respond to that. We got involved in the case right as towards the end of the administration. Your administration, the previous ministry, your administration as Secretary of State was very, very helpful. And then, of course, now we're basically stone silent with the current one. I mean, you just talk China and Christians and religious persecution. It's like the foreboding.
They're out.
So that's just part of the problem that we're seeing.
I mean, the idea that the religious freedom is central to human rights, that if you can't have a country where there's real human rights without religious freedom and religious liberty.
It is a core belief of mine. It was a core piece of understanding of the State Department under President Trump. It was work that we were doing to acknowledge that America is better off, right? We always talked about America first. America is better off when nations around the world permit their people to practice their faith in the way that they want to. The nations are more stable, their people are happier. Economic growth, all these data sets revolving around allowing folks to practice their faith. And so we worked diligently on it. We had a big team. We had ministerials. We brought people all across the world. It was a real priority. President Trump was the first president ever to go to the United Nations General Assembly and talk about religious freedom. This is an important part of who we are as Americans, and it's both moral and correct, but it's also a good thing for American freedom and safety.
I reflect sometimes on what it took for us to get our European Center for Law and Justice accredited with the United Nations. Well, it was a multi-year process with multiple hearings, and I'll never forget when we finally got it. We were before the General Assembly that approves this, and every conceivable group with the strangest things were being approved as NGOs.
Yes.
And it was us, and I believe it was us and the Jewish National Fund that both were, abstains, denies. Of course, part of the problem was we had sued Turkey, we had sued Russia, right. We brought litigation in international tribunals, so they weren't friendly. We finally got it, but we got it by force. I mean, we went in there, and I told the whoever was the presiding president at that particular time that we're not leaving without it because there's no justification for this, none. Now you're approving all these other groups, and it's starting to look like it's a little bit of anti-Semitism because we have an office in Jerusalem. Finally, we got it. I want to turn it to a case that you worked on with us very closely. I mean, a miracle case, Pastor Andrew Brunson. So here we have an American citizen, been practicing his faith, feels called to the mission field. He goes to Turkey, starts a church in Izmir, 23 years, no problem. All of a sudden, gets picked up by Turkish forces, jailed, imprisoned, trial starts. We're working with Turkish lawyers on the trial. We're working very closely with you and your team and the White House for his release. Turkey was a NATO ally. Without disclosing things we can't disclose, he was a political pawn. That's what my sense of it is, because I was on some of the calls, was that they were using Brunson as a negotiating tool with the United States, the Turks.
So we had many complex issues with the Turks. They were a NATO ally, but they were also engaged in activities that we didn't want them to be engaged in. I think President Erdogan knew that, and so yes, he was looking for points of leverage where he had capacity to impact how we were thinking about our decision-making process. So it was most unfortunate. They picked him up because they knew he would be important to the United States of America. And God bless President Trump. We got this right. We made clear this was unacceptable, and we began to do the things that I was just talking about. You have to use the tools of power that the United States has, and President Trump was prepared to do that by sanctioning senior Turkish officials to convince President Erdogan that he needed to allow Pastor Brunson to come home.
I'm chuckling a little bit because I was on one of those calls with when the president was talking to President Erdogan. He tells Erdogan, who doesn't know who this person is, he goes, I want you to know, if he's not released by the end of this week, this will be the most expensive pastor you've ever detained, and he'll be more famous than Billy Graham, which I don't know if that relates to Erdogan. When you say all the tools in the arsenal, was that the kind of global approach you took in dealing with these persecution cases?
It was. We did this everywhere. I'll say two things that reminds me of. First, it was always so important for us to be connected to groups like the ACLJ, who had feet on the ground,
right,
who knew things, who had nuanced understandings of the situation that sometimes we didn't have in government. Sometimes we knew things that you all didn't know. But working together collectively, we could present to these nations the demands that the American people rightly expect their leaders to do. And so we did this. In Pastor Brunson's case, you described it as a miracle. I certainly consider it so. We used the tools that the United States has and in its arsenal to successfully deliver an American home to freedom, back to his family, back to his ability to practice his faith. I've seen the good work he's out there doing. I'm really proud of the work that President Trump and our team did.
The moment in the White House when Andrew Brunson prayed for the president, you were there, C.C. Howe from our office was there. What was that like?
It was one of the highlights of my time in my 4 years serving the administration, to know that the work that went into that, my team on the ground in the embassy, they were good. They did very, very nice work all along building, and then the work that we did with the private sector, the public language that was taking place too. You talked about whether he knew who Billy Graham was or not. His team knew who Billy Graham was. His team knew that there would be moral harm to their nation if they didn't let him go. That collective power brought this man of Jesus to the Oval Office that day, and to get the chance to be there as he prayed for the president was remarkable.
And the power of social media, we see the power when it's shut off, but also the power of social media. Both times, those were made publicly by the president too, as a tweet to the world saying, first it's going to be sanctions. He named the officials, and they were sanctioned the next day. And then he said the next day would actually be by tweet the entire country. And it's so whatever was going on also behind the scenes, publicly, we had a very strong stand from our president, who was putting out this stand in his own words, saying this is how much it's worth to me and our country to see, one, get our American citizen home, but two, to stand up for religious liberty.
We were always very careful too. No tweet went out, no demarche was issued, no red line drawn unless we were prepared to deliver on it.
Right.
One of the things I've watched this administration do is say, we're going to do X, and then the other team runs through the line and they don't do X. This is really dangerous. We were very clear. We were measured. We were thoughtful. But when we said we were going to do something in the event that there was some condition that wasn't met, President Trump always followed through.
We are in a matching challenge here at the American Center for Law and Justice, and that means any amount you donate to the ACLJ, we have someone that's going to match that. So if you make a $20 gift, someone's going to give another $20, makes it 40. Simply go to aclj.org. You can become part of the Matching Challenge campaign.